Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're delving into a topic that often remains in the shadows of history books, a story that challenges the grand narratives we've been taught. We're talking about empires, not the gleaming monuments or celebrated conquests, but the hidden atrocities that quietly, yet profoundly, redefined their legacies. Empires, by their very nature, project an image of strength, civilization, and progress. Think of the Roman Empire, with its aqueducts and laws, or the British Empire, on which the sun supposedly never set. We learn about their art, their innovations, and their vast territories, but this is only one side of the coin. What about the stories that were intentionally buried, the voices that were silenced? The legacy of any great power is a complex tapestry, woven with threads of both glory and darkness. To truly understand history, we must be willing to examine the entire picture, not just the parts that make us feel comfortable. This isn't about assigning blame from a modern perspective, but about seeking a more complete and honest truth. It's less about acknowledging that the foundations of many empires were built not just with stone and ambition, but also with the suffering of countless individuals whose stories deserve to be heard. Let's begin with one of the most well-known, yet least understood, examples: the Belgian Congo under King Leopold II. At the end of the 19th century, Leopold acquired a vast territory in Central Africa, not as a colony of Belgium, but as his own private property. He named it the Congo Free State and sold it to the world as a philanthropic mission to civilize the natives and end the slave trade. The reality, however, was a nightmare of exploitation. Leopold's true goal was to extract as much wealth as possible, primarily rubber and ivory. To do this, he created a brutal regime. His private army, the Force Publique, enforced impossible rubber quotas on the local population. Villagers were terrorized, and those who failed to meet their quotas faced horrific punishments. Hands and feet were severed, not just from those who resisted, but from their wives and children as well, as a grim form of accounting for spent bullets and a tool of terror to ensure compliance. The world was largely unaware of these horrors for years, thanks to a carefully crafted propaganda campaign by Leopold. But the truth eventually began to leak out, thanks to the heroic efforts of individuals like Edmund Dean Morel, a shipping clerk who noticed that ships arriving from the Congo were filled with rubber, but the ships going back carried only soldiers and weapons, not trade goods. He, along with missionaries and whistleblowers, launched one of the first major international human rights campaigns of the 20th century. The public outcry eventually forced the Belgian government to take control of the Congo from Leopold in 1908, but by then, the damage was done. Historians estimate that millions of Congolese people died from murder, starvation, and disease during Leopold's rule. This brutal chapter completely redefines the legacy of a seemingly small European kingdom and serves as a stark reminder of how greed can be cloaked in the language of benevolence. The Congo Free State wasn't a state. It was a labor camp of continental size. Now, let's shift our focus to the British Empire, an entity often celebrated for spreading law, language, and infrastructure across the globe. While it did bring certain modernizations, its history is also marked by episodes of extreme violence and exploitation that are often downplayed or omitted from popular accounts. A key example is the treatment of India, the so-called jewel in the crown of the empire. One of the most devastating events was the Bengal famine of 1943. While India had experienced famines before, this one was different. It occurred during World War II, and many scholars argue it was not a natural disaster caused by drought, but a man-made catastrophe exacerbated by British wartime policies. Under the leadership of Winston Churchill, the British government prioritized supplying its troops and war effort over feeding the population of Bengal. Huge quantities of rice were exported from the region for military use, and emergency food imports were denied. Churchill's own dismissive attitude towards the suffering of the Indian people is well documented. He reportedly blamed the famine on the Indians themselves for breeding like rabbits. The result was catastrophic. An estimated 3 million people starved to death. Images from the famine show skeletal figures haunting the streets of Calcutta, a human tragedy on an almost unimaginable scale. This event shattered the myth of the British Empire as a benevolent ruler. It revealed a cold calculus where the lives of colonial subjects were considered expendable in service of the empire's strategic interests. It is a stark contrast to the heroic image of Churchill as a wartime leader and forces us to confront a more complicated and troubling legacy. Another dark chapter involves the concentration camps used by the British during the Second Boer War in South Africa from 1899 to 1902. This might surprise many, as we often associate concentration camps with other regimes of the 20th century. However, the British were among the first to use them on a massive scale. In an effort to defeat the Boer guerrilla fighters, the British military adopted a scorched earth policy, burning farms and displacing the civilian population. Over 100,000 Boer women and children were rounded up and forced into what were called refugee camps. Conditions in these camps were appalling. Food was scarce, sanitation was non-existent, and disease ran rampant. Tens of thousands of people, mostly children, died in these British camps from malnutrition and disease. The mortality rate was horrific. This wasn't a secret at the time. A brave British woman named Emily Horbos visited the camps and exposed the dreadful conditions to a shocked public back in Britain. Her report led to reforms, but for thousands, it was too late. This atrocity revealed the brutal lengths the empire was willing to go to secure victory and control, forever tainting its claims of moral superiority. It's a crucial piece of history that forces us to reevaluate who uses what tactics in times of war. These are just a few examples. We could talk about the Opium Wars, where Britain forced China to accept opium imports, leading to widespread addiction simply to balance trade deficits. We could discuss the brutal suppression of the Moemo rebellion in Kenya in the 1950s, which involved torture and mass detentions. Or the partitioning of India in 1947, which, while granting independence, was managed so chaotically by the British that it led to religious violence that killed up to 2 million people and displaced over 15 million. So why do these stories matter today? Because the legacies of these empires are not just in the past, they continue to shape our present. The arbitrary borders drawn by colonial powers in Africa and the Middle East are the root of many of today's conflicts. The economic exploitation of the past has contributed to the global inequalities we see now. The psychological scars of colonialism still affect the identities and societies of formerly colonized nations. By confronting these hidden atrocities, we are not trying to erase the achievements of these empires. We are simply adding crucial, missing chapters to the story. History is not about picking a side and cheering for it. It's about understanding the full spectrum of human behavior, the good, the bad, and the complicated. It's about developing a critical eye and questioning the simple, heroic narratives we are often fed. Knowing this history helps us be more informed global citizens. It helps us understand the roots of current international relations, resentments, and alliances. It reminds us to be skeptical of any power that claims a purely benevolent mission, and to always listen for the voices that have been silenced. The true legacy of an empire is found not only in its monuments, but also in its ruins and its ghosts. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into a difficult but necessary topic. If you found this video enlightening, please hit the like button and share it with someone who might be interested. And do not forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you won't miss our future explorations into the hidden corners of history. Let us know in the comments which empire's hidden history you'd like us to cover next. Until then, stay curious and keep questioning.